So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on our new release, Acrolinx 4.0. I am very excited about this release, so are my colleagues, and I'm eager to show you what we're going to be including in this new release. So let me start by saying that today is the announcement day. It's not the delivery day. We're expecting to release on February 28th, exactly 1 month from today. What I'm going to take you through this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are, is first off, voice scores, a brand new feature in Acrolinx 4.0. I'm also going to talk about analytics, which is a significant upgrade to the reporting capability of previous releases. And then I'm going to take you through some improvements we've made to existing features, terminology, rule contexts, and something that replaces existing functionality called the scorecard. So during each of these 5 sections, I will be answering questions, so please post your questions in the questions panel, and I'll get to them either during or at the end of each of these sections. If you forget to ask a question until later, I'll get to that question at the end. But before we go on, I'd like to find out more about the audience. So I'd like to know where you are in planning to implement Acrolinx. Have you already implemented Acrolinx? Are you planning to do so in the next 6 months, perhaps 12 months or later? Never? We have partners and so on the phone, or you don't know, don't want to answer. So about half of you say you already have, so it makes half of you customers. Another quarter say in the next 6 months, well, we're up to about 30% who say that you don't know or don't want to answer. I'll give it a few more seconds, and then I'll show you close the results and show them to you. The software doesn't let me show them to you while you're voting. So it's interesting, less than half of you are our current customers. That's interesting. Different than the earlier presentation we gave this morning. So you all can see the results. About 40% customers already have, over a quarter the next 6 months, and another quarter don't know or don't want to answer. I assume that's because you don't know. Okay, very good. We'll have another couple of polling questions coming up later. So let's talk about voice scores. This is a feature that was driven by several of our customers saying to us that not only do they want to get everybody in the organization aligned on a specific tone of voice, but in fact they want to be able to change that tone of voice. And as a content creator myself, that really resonated with me. And I think it's part of a larger trend that's made content more and more and more important to companies. And I love this quote from Gartner that points out that audiences are inundated by pleas for their attention, and consumers no longer respond to anything but the most compelling content. That means you need a great story, people need to be able to find it, and it needs to be readable, it needs to be engaging, it needs to be jargon-free and interesting and something that they'll read to the end and actually connect to. And it's no surprise that content is becoming more important and that people are becoming more aware of it. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of this that the content marketing is a very hot topic on the marketing side. It's hot for us at Acrolinx on the marketing side, but it's also we're seeing a lot more interest from companies everywhere in content marketing. And what's it about? It's all about delivering high quality content in order to build relationships. And why? Because buyers are building relationships with the companies they're buying from based on content. They're now 70% on average, 70% of the way through their buying decision before they ever talk to a salesperson from the vendor. Until then, their relationship with the vendor, with someone they're considering buying from, is built on content, the vendor's content, third-party content, but they decide, and often will decide not to contact somebody based on content. So content is more important than ever. And as a content generator myself, and I know most of you are, I think we can all stand a little taller, and it's probably good for our careers as well, that content is becoming so important. And it's not just marketing content. In fact, I think it's especially not just marketing content, although that's always been and will continue to be critical. We're now seeing that technical content is driving the buying process too. It's as important as marketing content to helping buyers choose, whether you're looking for, because that's where, I mean, all of us, I think, feel like we're going to get more less biased information, more objective information from technical content. And you can see this IBM survey here, which I think is very instructive. Almost 89% of the buyers say that technical content is important to their initial purchase decision. And we've seen similar numbers from other surveys. So this is now, technical content has now become as important as marketing content helping buyers choose products. I think clearly that's a huge change. So the objective behind 4.0, and especially behind the voice scores capability, was to help our customers with driving relationships with their content. So what are voice scores? Voice scores are a measurement of tone of voice, and it measures the entire document, not looking for defects, but looking for the overall tone of voice of the document, of the file, the web page, whatever it is that you're working on. And so what I'm showing here on the right side of the screen is the scores that we're delivering out of the box. In fact, customization is possible, but we think that most customers will be satisfied with and be able to use quite effectively these 3 out-of-the-box scores that we're providing, which are readability, informality, and liveliness, as you can see. So there are some aspects of this I need to explain and talk about how it's different than what Acrolinx does today and how it interacts with what Acrolinx does today. But let's start by looking at the bars in the upper right corner here. This is from the scorecard, which is produced at the end of each checking report, at the end of each check using Acrolinx. And the green section of each bar shows you the target area. The center of that green section is the target area. And so in this case, the target for readability is fairly high. You can see that in the case of liveliness, the target is a bit lower. The triangles show you where you fall in that target or outside of that target. And so in this case, as you can see, we've met the target for readability and liveliness, but we're too low on the scale of informality. And you can set those targets, and you'll see more as we go through this. You can set those targets based on document type or based on type of author. You can set them on, based on different criteria. Typically, you'd want to have, of course, technical content perhaps be less formal and less lively than marketing content. Initially, this will be available only for English, but by mid-year we'll have German supported, and we'll continue to support the additional languages that we have over time. So how do voice scores relate to style? We have these things we call style rules. And style rules can be something as simple as you should use contractions or you should not use contractions, depending on whether or not you want to be less formal or more formal. But style rules, and in fact all the rules, are about defects, right? They're about pointing out issues in the content and guiding authors to fix them. They don't measure specific aspects of style. They don't really consider aspects of style separately. Issues related to translatability, readability, informality, liveliness, anything else that has to do with the corporate style guide, all of those are lumped together under this category called style. And the guidance that we've always provided has been about detecting and correcting defects. So voice scores is really materially different in that it does measure overall tone of voice of each document. Now, because it measures overall tone of voice, the guidance that it provides is general. We'll talk about that more in a moment. So the objective of voice scores is to help you create content that meets your corporate standards for readability, informality, and liveliness. It's all about creating content that's more engaging and speaking and more uniform. And any customer, all of our customers will receive this capability as part of 4.0. So I talked about the guidance that we have related to voice scores, and it's general guidance. If your score is too low in liveliness, we can provide some general guidance on some things you can do to fix it up. But what may improve liveliness may in fact be a violation of some grammar rule. As an example, an incomplete sentence we judge to contribute to the liveliness of a document, as long as you don't go too far. But should we then ignore incomplete sentences for grammar checking? Well, no, of course not. We want authors to make the deliberate choice to have an incomplete sentence, and therefore we'll still call attention to it. So you could get a conflict in voice scores versus, say, grammar checking, and that's natural. You are also going to, but the specific guidance, for example, guidance to use contractions or to avoid contractions, that will continue to come from style rules. So the combination of style rules and voice scores will help guide your authors in the right direction. Now, I should point out that just because the score is 100, it doesn't make it best. It just means it's the highest. As I mentioned before, the target score that you have in mind may vary based on document type. And the adjustment we expect you to do, the adjustment that we expect you to make is to the targets and base it based on document type rather than trying to customize how we calculate that score. Is it possible to customize it? Yes. Do you want to get our professional services team involved to customize it to your heart's content? You might. We would recommend that you not, but that would be, of course, your choice. We'll come back to that polling question in a moment. What I'd like to do now is go to the dashboard and show you what's available for configuring voice scores. So the dashboard, for those of you who don't know, is a browser-based tool primarily for those with administrative privileges. In fact, pretty much exclusively for those with administrative privileges to set up various aspects of the product. So we're going to talk here about configuring voice scoring, and you can see there's 2 tabs under voice scoring. There's the general settings and the target scores. We'll get to target scores in a moment. But under general settings, you can choose whether or not to enable a voice score, that is to have that appear in the checking results. You can also choose what it's named. Now, we're not finished with this release. I'm showing you a beta quality release. We're still working on the assessment of liveliness, and so internally we're calling this new scores, still have to be done, but for purposes of presentation, I wanted just to call it liveliness. And you can see all 3 are enabled. Now in terms of target scores, you can see I've already set up 2 sets of target scores here. One I called standard, the other one I called TechCom. And to set a target score, you just drag this slider back and forth. Now, I'm sure that's bringing up a question we'll get to in just a moment, which is how do you know what number you want? You can see that I've set up TechCom scores to be somewhat lower in terms of their target in, I think, all 3 of these categories than the standard score. And there is separately in the product, there's the capability using something called checking profiles to apply those settings to specific user types or specific document types or whatever criteria that you want. So let's talk about the obvious question of how do you know what score to set? And our answer is this is not an exact science. Our best practice advice to you is to take some documents that do hit the right note in terms of readability, informality, and liveliness, and run them through Acrolinx to see what score it gives you. And then as a test to make sure that, in fact, you've identified the right criteria, run some documents through that you believe are inadequate, either too high or too low for these 3 characteristics. Now, in fact, we don't recognize the possibility of something being too readable, but we do recognize in the way we handle the other scores of being too informal or too lively. So that's the best way to do it is compare the 2. And so now I'm going to check for questions here. There are some questions, and make sure that we take care of those before moving on to the next. Good question. Someone asked, are we also planning to rate a score around, say, internationalization? Informally, internally, we've been calling this having a translatability score. And I think that's an interesting question, something we've talked about. Oh, and look, Michelle, you noticed the same thing, same idea. That's interesting. So we've talked about that. We think that's a pretty interesting thought, and at some point we think we could certainly add that to the standard list. You can, show the last slide behind the dashboard. Sure, I'll get back to that. We'll do that. You can, and I assume you can assign a target set to each rule set. No, it's not that configurable. The whole point of voice scores is to try to provide some level of standardization and across document types, even across organizations. And so we have the Acrolinx readability score. Is flesh concave a part of that? Absolutely. But then there's other factors that enter into readability that are more than just flesh concave. Likewise, the liveliness and informality scores are based on our judgment of what we think makes something lively or informal or formal. And I've shown you the extent of the configurability there. A couple of questions about what we mean by liveliness. I wasn't prepared to answer that question entirely, but some examples of what makes content lively are some things we look for are variability in sentence length. Some sentences should be shorter, some should be longer rather than having a monotonous sentence length. Another example, as I used earlier, is having some incomplete sentences. Sometimes that helps to eliminate the verb. A question can help with your liveliness score as long as every sentence isn't a question, but having a question in creating a more conversational style. There's also penalties on the liveliness side. For example, using jargon or buzzwords or technical terms. All of those can reduce your liveliness score. Okay, so we've got some great questions and also an interesting comment here. A couple of interesting comments. One of them talks about cultural sensitivity, such as, well, how would we have an informality score for German? We're not even sure that we would. We've been talking about what do we want to do for German. It's a different culture, a different language, a different way of speaking. What are the voice scores going to be for German? So right now, if you look at our German website, we talk about having these 3 scores in English, and we say that German's coming, but we're not sure what they are. And then writing for translatability can reduce informality and liveliness, so you can get a conflict, as someone else points out. And then finally, someone says, we've bought Acrolinx for simplified English checking, and is that no longer an emphasis? And I would say, for those who focus on compliance, Acrolinx is still focused on compliance, so that hasn't changed. But we have expanded because we have lots of customers now who are looking at using Acrolinx much more broadly in their organization than just for technical content. And for those customers, tone of voice matters a lot. So, but actually this feature, the capabilities underlying this feature are going to allow us to add some functionality in the compliance capabilities that we have, which should be interesting in the future. Okay, some great questions and great comments. What I'd like to do now is get to the second polling question, because I am curious what sort of content you guys are creating. So let me get to that. Just a moment. Okay, so what types of content does your team create? The first 4 choices are all exclusive. Is it just technical documentation, just marketing content, just learning content, just something product content that's built into the product, or is it some combination of the above? And of course, it's the some combination that's the most interesting for me, and 3/4 of you have said some combination, which means I don't know anything from this polling question. I wish I knew. The other quarter, it won't surprise you, are technical documentation, and we have a small number of people here who represent marketing material and learning content. But it's interesting, almost 2/3 are some combination. I wish I knew more, but that's all right. So we're almost at, most of you have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the polls, share the results, and now you can see where we ended up. So we were almost 1/3 tech docs, and almost 2/3 some combination, and a few of you in the other areas. So interesting. So that shows you certainly technical documentation remains an area that's very important for us. All right. Let's move on to the next capability, and that's analytics. I should start by saying that for existing customers, analytics replaces the reporting functionality. You may or may not have that capability. If you have it, analytics will just replace it when you get 4.0, and in fact, some aspects of it will seem familiar to you. There's a lot of new features, a lot of new functionality, so we wanted to give it a new name to signify the impact of this change in the investment that we've made. If you don't happen to have a license for reporting, then you're not going to get a license for analytics, but you could certainly talk to us about that. Okay, so we were driven, in this case, by our customers' desire to be able to show metrics to their executives that matter. And so, for example, what's the quality trend? How are you doing on the quality of your content over time? And not just overall content, but how are you doing, say, for specific product lines or specific document types, or perhaps even in specific work groups or divisions of the organization? There may be lots of ways you want to slice and dice the data. We haven't offered those ways of slicing and dicing before. We've also made some nice changes to user experience and performance. So let's talk about, and in fact, I'll demonstrate with live software. I'll demonstrate some of these capabilities. There's really some depth, interesting depth here. So there's some new reports on cost savings, on quality, trends and on usage. And the whole point of all of this is, from an executive level perspective, how are we doing against our targets? And then also, how are we doing against our cost savings targets? Because for most of you, when you make a business case for Acrolinx, you're also looking to make, to find some savings in editing costs, translation costs, and authoring costs. And I'll show you the ROI report that talks about cost savings, and that goes into some detail, as well as identifying problem areas in various aspects of your operation. So let's go through the process of choosing a report, and then we'll just do that live here. So let me go to Analytics, and back to the dashboard here. Here we are under Analytics. I click on Create Report, and when I click on Create Report, let's get started here. You can see I have 12 report types. And I'm going to show you ROI in a moment. I'm going to start with the quality report, however. So you start with selecting a time period, and you can see we've got a bunch of built-in time periods, standard time periods here to make it very easy to select. I want to look at the last quarter, the last month, current month, whatever. Or you can select a custom date range and look at an exact time period. Well, we're going to leave it as last year. Then the next thing you can do is break down the data based on, looking at it by putting points in the chart every month, and that's what we're showing here on the right. I've already run this report. Every quarter, every week, every year wouldn't be useful for only a year's worth of data, but you can see that you can break it down as you like. As always, you can choose which language you want and which rule set you want. But here's a couple of new categories. You can choose to look at it, in this case, by user type. Now, user types can be whatever you configure them to be. I'll show you that later. In this case, we've said, okay, we're going to choose to look at the information by department, and we're only going to get the documentation of finance departments. We're going to leave IT out of it. So you can choose multiple values, and then you can also choose to filter further by document-related information. So it could be document type, product, project, that sort of thing. If I chose product, then I get a list of products I could choose, and I could say control-click to choose every other one of them, and I could add that to my search. And so do very fine analysis of the content. But I'm just going to leave it at, I want to know how the documentation of finance departments collectively have done over the last year, and I want to see the data week by week. So that's a lot of data points, and it goes up and down quite a bit, but at least there you can see that there's what's going on. And it shows me not only in a line graph, but also in a tabular form, gives me all the data. If I wanted to get that tabular data and do something more with it, do more analysis with it, then I can export it to Excel or export it as a comma separated values file. I could also export it as a nice attractive PDF file if I like. And any of you who are familiar with the reporting functionality from previous releases will be very pleased to know that the Excel and CSV versions of these files are about capturing the data, not about trying to mimic the format that you see on the screen. So it's much easier to use. And for those of you who want to drive analytics through your API, if you click on the API link, it will generate the parameters that you would use to call Acrolinx. So it doesn't write the API for you, but at least it generates the parameters so you could run this quality report, say you could call for it every month. You still have to use a third-party program to make the call, but this generates the API parameters, which is a nice little convenience. But now let's go back and look at, I mentioned this ROI report. You can think of the ROI report as really a cost savings report. The idea is to show how much do you think Acrolinx helped you save in the last time period, whatever you've selected here. And you can do it again. You can do it by department, you could do it by product line, or you could do it for the whole organization if you wanted just to say, nope, none. No selections here. Just generate the report for the entire company. Now this one takes a bit of time because it has to go through, I think I've got about 30,000 checking reports in my demonstration database. It's going through all of them, and what it's going to do is look at only one checking report for each document, the earliest one, and then count up the number of flags, that is the number of potential defects that it found, categorize those into different buckets, and then apply a cost savings parameter. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, well, where do those cost savings parameters come from? And we'll get to that in a moment. But let's go ahead and finish up the report so you can see what it looks like, and then we'll get into how you set up this report. This is the newest and most elaborate report in the system. The amount of words before my computer is finished. All right, while it's doing that, let me just go ahead and advance the slides through. If you wanted, if you'd like to download these slides later, you'll find that all of the important information that I provided in the demonstration is also in the slides. And someone asked about the recording of this presentation, and yes, that will be available later for you to download. We'll send a link as soon as it's available. And my computer is still working. I don't remember it taking quite this long, but I think it's because I told it to give me all of the data rather than just for the two departments I originally asked for. So it's going to take a bit longer. While I'm doing that, let me see if there's any questions I need to answer. Are these reports only available to administrators? You do have to have the right privileges to look at them, but and we can go into that later. But you don't have to have the ability to change anything in the system to run reports. You can certainly run reports with relatively low privileges, just enough to run the report. You can generate quality reports by individual authors, and you can also prevent generating quality reports by individual authors if you happen to be in an area where the privacy laws say that you shouldn't do that. All right, so we'll come back to questions in a moment. Let me go ahead and, so there's the report over time. This is for the last year, and according to 30,000 checking reports, saved quite a bit of money. So you, of course, are wondering, how do we know? So let's go to Administration under Analytics, and let's go to Configure ROI Reporting, because that's where it's all done. That's where the magic happens. Now we'll start with the report settings. First off, what currency do you want? Of course, I'm demonstrating in dollars, but my German colleagues are demonstrating in euros, and you may want to demonstrate in Turkish lira or calculate in Turkish lira or something else. So you can see there's three categories here that have been set up. And let me describe what a category is. And I think the best thing to do is just click on one and see the description. So we call this one Mechanical Editorial Saved. And you can see from the description, these are issues that Acrolinx finds that otherwise it would have taken an editor to find, to mark, to send back to the author, for the author then at some later date, rather than right on the spot, at some later date, refresh his memory, figure out what he was doing, make the change, and then perhaps the editor sees it again to see that it's changed, perhaps not. And we said for every one of those that's corrected, it's worth $5.83. I'll explain where that comes from in a moment. And then we said 65% of them will be corrected. Now, your mileage may vary. You may say, no, in our case, it's more like 1/3 get corrected. We made our best guess based on customers that we worked with to develop this feature, but you may have different numbers. Now, in terms of the cost, $5.83, that's based on time. And so in this case, the example here, and this 583 happens to come from one of the examples, is we said, well, an editor might have taken 3.5 minutes to detect and correct this problem, and the author may have had to, as part of that 3.5 minutes, may have also needed some time to find it and fix it. And that by Acrolinx checking for it, guiding the author right to it, guiding the author to make the correction via Acrolinx, the author, there's 3.5 minutes have been saved. And at $100 an hour, fully loaded cost, that's worth $5.83. I haven't actually done the calculation to see if that's correct. I'm only assuming that it is. So what's your hourly cost fully loaded? And how much time do you think that this saves? You can make those changes yourself, and you can do those for, in this case, we've got three categories here: mechanical, translation costs, and terminology issues. You may have more, but this is out of the box how we've set it up. You can add more if you like. You can click on it and go through and put all the numbers in. Okay, that gets you so far, but then the next thing you have to do, And you can see it's a little fussy to set this up, right? But it's not something you're going to do every day. At least we made it relatively easy to set up, although you do have to know your way around here. So we say, okay, Acrolinx has several categories of checking that we do, right? Terminology, their sentence too long issues specifically, spelling issues, and a whole lot of style and grammar issues. So no doubt, no surprise that terminology issues are assigned to that category, sentence too long, assigned to translation cost savings, spelling issues assigned to mechanical editorial savings, and then there's all these others. And you can see that there's a lot of rules in here, and some of them are not assigned. Like avoid generic verb. That's assigned no ROI category because we don't see a cost savings by guiding you to use a non-generic verb. But maybe you think that there is. You can select rules that you think ought to be assigned to a category and just assign them. I could assign them to one of these categories. I'm going to leave it as no ROI category selected. I could also, if I wanted to, limit the number of them, number of filters that I see, to, in this case, to the word use or display verbs or whatever I wanted to. So I'm hopeful that that makes that part pretty clear. Let me go and see if I can answer a few questions before we move on. So you asked a question about whether or not Acrolinx actually counts corrected issues. And there's a whole separate conversation to be had about that. We did add the capability, but it's not well tested yet by our beta customers. But we added the capability to keep track of first and last check. And if we have first and last check information, we'll do the cost savings based on actual flags fixed rather than just a percentage of the flags that are fixed. And that you can get into more by reading through the documentation, but that capability does exist to look for actuals rather than perspective. Someone asked, well, how does that data get into Acrolinx in the first place? And every time the author runs a check, we're collecting that checking report, that checking data. And so what you're seeing is based on that checking data. Draft checks would skew the results. Well, in fact, the reports in this case assume that we're looking at the first checking report for a document, not the last checking report for a document, because of course the last checking report for a document could be the final one that the author runs to say, okay, everything is good. If we looked at that one, then we wouldn't know what had been fixed. So we look at the first one, not the last one. Okay. You ask about aggregating individual topics when you're working on XML, and the answer is it depends. If you're looking at doing the check against a data map, then yes, it will look at the entire document. If you're doing the check against individual components, then it only looks at those components. Okay, great questions, great stuff. Let's move back to the presentation. There's a few more things to mention here. Oh yes, there's all of the metadata fields that are new in this release. So in previous releases we had metadata fields only for user information, and most of you probably don't even know that's there because there was no UI for configuring it. And I'll get to what user information means in a moment. In this release we also added document information, and all of it's now configurable in the dashboard. I'll get to the rest of the stuff in the screen in a moment. Let me show you some examples of user information versus document information. So document information could be something like product, document type, version, audience, something that's specific to the document. But user information is about the user, so about the author or the reviewer, whoever's using Acrolinx. So user fields typically wouldn't change, right? Someone belongs in a group, they stay in a group, and they would enter this information once. Acrolinx would pop up a browser window and say, please tell me what work group you're in, what department you're in. And all of this depends on how you want to set it up. I'll show you setting up in a moment. But they would enter that information, and then for each document, as they create a document, again, they would see a form pop up, and they'd be able to choose what product or what document type, whatever it is you want to set up. So let's go take a look at how we set that up. And those are called custom fields. So we're still in analytics. The custom fields aren't used only for analytics, but we'll show you the example here. So we have two types, documents and users. On the document type, I've already set up one field, only one called product. Now, there were some other examples here I gave on the slide, like document type. In fact, you saw some of those in the demo data, but you might have wondered why that didn't show up here, and that's because it's demo data. So I could add document type. And now we say, okay, document type is in there. Now, is this going to be, is the user going to choose from a list of potential choices, or is the user just going to type in the document type? In this case, we probably want to choose from, say, a technical manual, a service guide, a service bulletin, that sort of thing. And then once we're done, there they are. And so if we save that, I would now have, I'll go ahead and save it, why not? Now I have those two fields available under document types. You can see you can create whatever you want, and if you want to delete one, I guess I'm just going to take that back out, delete that, and it's back to where it was. Now in user information, you can, oh, by the way, you can see you can ask users to fill out the user information form before they run a check. And then you can see the fields here. So this is user-specific information, and the other one is document-specific information. I hope that made it clear. You see this little warning symbol, by the way. Checking profiles are a feature we introduced in 3.2 for managing check settings, and there is an important interaction. It's a good interaction, but it also potentially a confusing interaction between these custom fields and checking profiles. Something I think perhaps better for a later conversation. If you don't know about checking profiles, it's worth reading about that in the documentation. There seem to be a lot of questions here about this. Someone asked about going back to the mechanical issues. That was not translation cost savings. There was actually a separate one we set up for that. You ask if that data will become a storage problem on the Acrolinx server. We don't think so. And it's really it depends on your database. But if you use the internal database, which is something called H2, then yeah, you might run into a problem. But as long as you're using an external database, you should not run into any sort of issue. Okay, good questions. Back to, yeah, let's have a webinar about checking profiles. Robin, that's a good idea. You should please put that on the list, and we'll do a webinar on checking profiles. I think that would be a fun one.
Okay.
Another interesting observation that I'll save for later. So we've looked at configuring ROI report parameters. That's the cost-saving stuff. You can select users to ignore. Typically, you have people who are using Acrolinx, especially in larger organizations, who are generating checking reports that you really don't want to evaluate as part of, say, knowing what your cost savings are, what your quality trend is. You can select users to ignore quite easily with this capability. I haven't selected anyone yet, but I could. You can also anonymize user-specific data. That's a configuration setting. It's not in the dashboard, but for those of you operating in countries where there are privacy laws preventing you, say, from knowing what individual authors are doing, you can anonymize this data. And then finally, we added a really nice new feature in this release to allow you to search for checking reports across, they're now called scorecards, across all of them. In this case, I've got 30,000 of them, so it's going to take a while before it even shows me the first ones. We won't wait. But you can see that at the top there's a search field where you can search for them, it's checking reports or now scorecards that contain a specific word, and you can also search for them over time, over a certain time period. So these are all, there were 3,000 that contained voice out of some, I don't remember how many there were, but a lot. All right, moving on. We've seen this, and now let's talk about terminology. So those of you who, there's about a third of you who are familiar with using terminology in Acrolinx, 2/3 who are not. So let me talk to you about what Acrolinx 4.0 changes in terminology. 3 important points. First off, it's an infinitely scrolling list of terms, which means if you have 100 or 200 or 300 terms that you want to work with as a set, you can do that now instead of being limited by the number that will show on a page. Second, in the list view, many parameters you can edit right there without having to go to a separate view, so it saves you some picks and clicks. And third, there's some nice grouping capabilities. So again, let's go back and take a look. I've set this up already. Now we're in terminology. We'll go to this particular domain. You can see we have 120 terms in the switches domain. And let me undo this for now. So I have set this up. Well, it's a few things. First off, it found 120 terms, and only 25 were displayed, none selected. If I were to scroll down, get to the bottom here, and now you can see at the top, I scrolled a couple of times. It said we're still at 120 terms. Now we have 75 showing on the screen. Now I could still choose all terms. If I click on this, it says 120 terms found, 75 displayed, 120 terms selected. So you can operate on all the terms for whatever your filter is. In this case, I'm just looking at these under this domain. And as those of you who are familiar with Acrolinx know that the filtering capabilities are vast. You can get very specific, you can get very broad. And when you get very broad, you'd like to be able to do some things, some edits, say, on all the terms. For example, I could say, well, change all of the term type fields to full form. And I could run that on all the terms at once. I'm not going to do that because I don't know what I'm going to screw up if I do. But I can run on all selected terms, even though only 75 terms are displayed. Or I could run it just on these 3, which it looks like I've already started. I must have done that before. So that's nice. You can also group by term entry, which allows you to see synonyms all together. So when I did that, you can see that there's a little line here in between each set, and these are showing me different terms that belong, that are synonyms for the same one. And so I can, if I want to, I could click on this to edit that term. I could either change the name or I could add it, a term. Here I could change the status, and this is where it gets cool. I could go from preferred to admitted right there without having to go to a separate screen. I could change the language. No, that does require a separate, different change. I could add a domain, click the plus sign, and I could add it to, I don't know what that is, but I'll add it to that one. If I want to get rid of a domain, I could click on the X to take it back out. Term type, well, that's one of these custom fields. I chose the columns that are displayed over here on the left. That's very easy to do. That's a nice feature we've had for quite some time. And now here I am in term type. I could change it back to undefined. Yeah, I know. I remember I did this before. This is the second webinar of the day. And then, but can I change the image? No. To change the image, I would have to go and edit this term, which means going to a different page. And then I have all the parameters available to edit that term. But you see, this is a very nice way to edit a bunch of parameters at once. A nice addition. I don't know that there's any questions about this, but let me see if there are. Yeah, someone points out that infinitely scrolling lists would be nice for other purposes too. Someone else asked, what does the product look like when the user's using it? We'll get to that. I will show that later. That was not something actually I intended to show in this webinar. Okay. So you've seen that. Now let's talk about rule contexts. So in previous releases of Acrolinx, you could, of course, set the context for a rule, but you couldn't do it yourself. Acrolinx Professional Services had to do it. And what this means is choosing where a rule applies. An example is if you have a procedure, you want to see that you're using imperatives. A simpler example to understand might be if you are looking at a title or a list item, you do not want to check for end of sentence punctuation. Let's look at how easy that is to do. So here I've gone down to Resources. I'm in Configure Rules. And I've chosen a rule set, in this case EN-marketing. And now I'm looking at all the rules here. Here's all the rules for EN-marketing. You can see most of them are enabled. And in previous releases, you could easily disable it. What you could not do easily was pick the context in which that rule applies if it's only some of them. And if I click on this, you can see that I can enable or disable this rule in selected contexts. And down here are all the contexts in the document. and I can control-click to choose which ones I want to appear or, not to apply. So I could mess things up very quickly by disabling the end of sentence rule in lots of different contexts. Someone might have noticed I just chose to eliminate it for paragraphs. Not a good idea. So I'm going to cancel that. You get the idea. It's very quickly you can set this up yourself. Okay. Now let's find, last but not least, by any means least, is the scorecard. Now it replaces both the checking report, which is which you used to bring up in a browser, and the results dialog, which comes up at the end of a check. You'll see that in a moment, but I want to talk about why we did this. Well, we had customers who said, we need the checking report or the results dialog to be more functional, more usable, and provide some more information. We needed to add support for voice scores, and we wanted something that looked nicer. So we combined those two into a single report. When the check completes, a pop-up window comes up with the entire report, but the summary of it, the summary you see on the screen, shows just what you saw before in the results, the old results dialog. But you can drill in right there, or you can bring it up separately. And it's got some changes. Most importantly, the scores now range from 0 being bad to 100 being good. That's a big change. For anyone who's used to the old golf score method of scoring, which meant a higher score was worse, this is going to mean an adjustment. Let's take a look. Let's stop talking and take a look. Now you asked about how this, how this looks to the writer. This is what the writer would see after clicking the check button in Acrolinx. They click the check button, we do the check, and then it comes up with a scorecard summary. It shows which document it's for, it shows the overall quality score, it shows each type of issue, and it shows the number of those issues. And here's what's cool, if you hover over one, it'll show you the top 7 most frequent issues in that category. Now what's valuable here is that means that on one screen you can see all of your top issues, all the hot spots in your document. What do you need to be worried about? In this case, we can see informality is too low. We can see we're in the red range for things like style and grammar. Spelling is a concern, and terminology is a big problem. And that's not all. We can go quickly to, well, terminology is a problem. Let's click on here and take us right to terminology. So you can see we can navigate with these side tabs very quickly. And once I'm in terminology, I can see all 4 types of terminology: deprecated, admitted, valid, and new. I then set it up for new terms. You can see as I scroll over each of these, it highlights it and shows me a little context menu. Now that context menu allows you to create an email. It'll pop up an email form. I have my email turned off right now so as not to disturb the webinar, but it'll populate that email with the context. It'll populate the subject with the type of issue that it is, and you can add who you're sending it to and add some more information about it. So it saves a simple step. So now most authors would say, I don't want to see this. Don't show it to me again. Just turn that off, and I want to just go and correct the issues. Now this is going to look a little more colorful than normal because we've got some diagnostic stuff turned on, and now it goes away because of automatic save from Word. I turned this on a long time ago. So I'm going to go ahead and start the checking report, the check again. I'll come back to this in a moment. And it takes a moment because I got a problem in this early build, so I'm going to have to come back to that. So let's go back to the while this is working. Let's go back to the presentation. Some other things I talked about: tab navigation. Links now look like links, and you can suppress viewing that window again. In terms of new functionality, it shows the average sentence length, and you saw providing one-click creation of an email. Here's a quick summary of what you just saw with that darn thing displayed in the middle. I guess I could minimize it, but I don't want to. So I'm not going to ask you this polling question yet. I will before we get to that, I will show one thing that you asked for, which is how does it look to the author. In the meantime, let me look at other questions. Can we disable that email thing if needed? That's funny. I don't know. send me an email on that. My contact information will be up at the end of this webinar. Send me an email about that, and I'll get you an answer to that. Someone likes the flat look of the scorecard, as opposed to the checking results in version 3.1. Yes, much easier to read. When will we support integration with Madcap Flare? It's funny, I had that question in the earlier webinar today. I did a 6 a.m. one for the East Coast and Europeans who wanted English webinar, and that came up. So the answer is we're waiting for Madcap version 10 to come out, and we will come out shortly after Madcap version 10. We already have the beta of Madcap version 10. Acrolinx will not be compatible with earlier versions of Madcap because we needed Madcap to add some functionality to their API so that we could be a good citizen within Madcap Flare. So version 10 only, end of March, perhaps April, is a good date to expect. These features are compatible with Confluence, correct? Well, I believe so. That's another question that I can't answer right now, so you'll have my contact information up in a moment. No updates to the SEO functionality. Let's see what else we have. Are the scores still normalized? If so, using what formula? I can send you the formula. Send me an email, and I'll be glad to do that. It's I don't have that off the top of my head. How do we produce the list of available contents? It's pretty much fixed. And let's see, there's a couple more at the end here. Plugin works with AuthorIt version 6. I don't remember which version it works with. I know it works with AuthorIt. Send me an email. I'm sorry to keep on saying that. I don't have all these at the top of my head. Send me an email, and I'll be glad to research that for you. And then does this integrate with Vassant and/or Adobe Experience Manager? We don't have any specific integration with Vassant, but we do have integration with Adobe Experience Manager. It used to be called Adobe CQ, for those of you who don't know. Okay, now we'll ask the last question, and we'll get into any final questions here. Let me bring up the polling and find out how you think I did. So, how satisfied are you with the information you received today? Very satisfied, somewhat satisfied, neutral, dissatisfied, not sure, don't want to answer. Well, it's more than 0 who are dissatisfied, so that's understandable, I suppose. Can't please everybody, but I would like to know, and you'll see my email address in the next slide. It's perfectly fine if you send me an email and tell me how I could have done better. But most of you are satisfied, or somewhat satisfied at least. I'm going to close the results, share them with you so you can see how I did. Almost half, very. Another third, somewhat. 1/7, if I've done the math right, or neutral. And then 1 or 2, not sure, don't want to answer, and maybe I don't have the numbers right. I don't know how many are here. But anyway, there we go. Now you can see how I did. I can see how I did, and my colleagues can see how I did. Okay, so some follow-ups before we get to any final questions. There's my contact info, pg.bartlett@acrolinx.com. Note it, send me an email. I invited you to send me questions. In the earlier webinar today, people did send questions. I'm happy to have questions. As I mentioned earlier, we are recording this right now. As soon as we're finished, I'll post this. I'll get this recording uploaded, and as soon as we can, hopefully today, but tomorrow, I think probably for sure, we should have the recording up, and we'll send the link to you. I say for sure as if that's always how it works. Sometimes we run into glitches, but normally the next day we'll have the webinar recording up, and the slides will be up as well. You can download the slides in PowerPoint format and share them with your colleagues, or share them the recording. So let's see how much time we have for questions. We have 2 minutes for questions before the top of the hour, and I have no more questions left to answer. How perfect is that timing? And I'm not going to make you stay on the line any longer than necessary. Since there's no more questions, we will conclude the webinar. Thanks everybody for coming. I hope to see you next time. See you later. Bye-bye.